The wind carried dust across the empty road, swirling it around the worn boots of Rancher Cole as he mended a section of old barbed wire fence on the edge of his land. His hands were calloused, sure, working with steady rhythm, the kind that came from decades of repetition and solitude. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the sky was the color of wet ash, soft and cold-looking, stretching over miles of open prairie. He heard the footsteps before he saw them, small ones, hesitant, dragging slightly. He turned and saw two children standing by the roadside. The older one, a girl maybe 11 or 12, had her chin lifted in defiance, though her shoulders sagged from the weight of the suitcase in her hand, and something heavier. Her dress was faded, too light for the weather, and her boots looked too big, maybe inherited or borrowed. Beside her, a smaller boy clutched her free hand, his face streaked with dried tears and dust. He looked barely 6. Cole set his pliers down and stood, brushing off his jeans. The girl stepped forward, stopping just short of the fence. She stared straight at him with wide, serious eyes, brown and too old for her age. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "Our mama died this morning," she said. "We got nowhere to go, Rancher." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange in the morning stillness. For a moment, Cole said nothing. He took them in, the trembling of the boy's lip, the tight grip the girl kept on his hand, like she was the only thing keeping him together. Like she was the only thing holding herself together. He looked past them, down the long dirt road that led nowhere fast, then back at their faces. Something ancient and tired flickered in his eyes, and he took a breath that felt deeper than most. He unlatched the gate without a word and stepped aside. "Then you're already home," he said. He didn't smile, but his voice held something steady, something warm. The girl stared at him for a second longer, like she wasn't sure she'd heard right. Then she nodded once, and the boy looked up at her, confused but trusting. Together, they stepped through the gate, onto the ranch, onto something new. The farmhouse kitchen smelled of something warm, potatoes, onions, maybe a bit of sage, and it wrapped around the children like a blanket, though neither of them looked relaxed enough to notice. The air inside was warmer than outside, but Ellie still sat with her shoulders drawn up like she expected to be told to leave at any moment. Luke sat beside her at the table, legs dangling off the chair, swinging slowly, his spoon clutched tight in one small hand. The table was worn smooth with time, and the chairs didn't match. A chipped blue bowl of soup sat in front of each child, thick broth, bits of vegetables, a few precious pieces of meat floating near the surface. Luke took careful, silent sips, too polite or too afraid to slurp. Ellie didn't eat at first. She kept glancing toward the man moving about the kitchen with heavy footsteps, Rancher Cole, who had given them this meal, this quiet, and this roof. Cole didn't say much. He poured milk into two mismatched glasses, placed one in front of each child with an awkward sort of care. His movements were rough but not unkind, like someone used to being alone but trying to remember how to share space with others. Luke noticed a photograph on the mantel just beyond the kitchen, a dusty frame propped between two old books. The photo showed a younger version of Cole, with a boy who looked about Luke's age, maybe a little older. The boy in the photo had a wide grin, arms wrapped around a puppy, and sunlight pouring over both of them like a blessing. Luke pointed, but it was Ellie who asked, softly, "You had a son?" Cole turned his head toward the mantel but didn't walk over. His eyes lingered on the photo for a few seconds longer than necessary. He nodded once, slowly. "Long time ago," he said. "Lost him young." The words dropped like stones in a well. Ellie looked down at her soup. Luke said nothing, but the movement of his spoon paused. They understood. Maybe not the whole story, but the shape of it. Loss, quiet and sharp and endless, was something they knew, too. Cole didn't add anything more. He sat across from them, elbows resting on the table, gaze distant but present. The wind moaned outside the window panes. Inside, it was still, except for the clinking of spoons and the soft creak of old wood settling. No one cried. No one said they were sorry. But something softened in the silence between them. Not a fixing. Nothing gets fixed that quickly, but a small stitching of thread between strangers who had all lost too much, too soon. The sun stood high in the sky, spilling golden light across the dusty fields and worn-out fence posts of the ranch. The barn loomed ahead, old but sturdy, its red paint faded to a soft rusted hue. Inside, the smell of hay, earth, and livestock wrapped around Ellie and Luke as they followed Rancher Cole into the dim coolness. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the wooden slats. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon cooed lazily. Ellie wore borrowed boots that flopped slightly when she walked, her long hair tied back in a messy braid. She watched carefully as Cole picked up a pitchfork and began scooping straw into a wheelbarrow, his movements unhurried but sure. "You ever muck a stall before?" he asked, not looking at her. "No," she said, stepping closer. "But I can learn." He handed her the pitchfork without ceremony, nodded toward the stall to the right. "You start there. Don't need it perfect, just honest." Ellie nodded and got to work. The pitchfork was heavier than she expected, and the straw clung to the floor like it didn't want to leave. But she didn't complain. She clenched her jaw, squared her shoulders, and pushed harder. Across the barn, Luke stood next to a goat pen, arms crossed. He watched the animals warily as they milled about, bleating and chewing without concern. Cole came over and handed him a bucket of feed. "Think you can handle that, cowboy?" he said. Luke blinked up at him. "I ain't a cowboy. Not yet," Cole said. "But you might be." Luke looked down at the bucket, then back at the goats, who had noticed and begun bleating louder, crowding at the gate. After a moment, he stepped forward and awkwardly dumped the feed into the trough. A few pellets missed, bouncing off the floor. One goat bleated right in his face. Luke giggled. Ellie looked up from her work at the sound, his first real laugh in days. She smiled, then quickly looked back down. Later, Cole led them outside to the horse paddock. A tall, dapple gray mare stood calmly in the corral, her ears flicking forward. "She's called Juniper," Cole said, lifting Luke gently onto the fence rail so he could see better. "You treat her gentle, she'll trust you. Horses know things." "Know what?" Luke asked, watching the mare with wide eyes. "When someone's lying, when someone's scared, when someone's kind." Cole handed the boy a chunk of carrot. Luke reached out slowly, and Juniper leaned forward, lips brushing his palm as she took the treat. Luke giggled again, softer this time, and Cole smiled faintly. "You got grit, kid," Cole said. Luke beamed at that. "Mama used to say that too." Cole didn't answer. He looked off toward the hills beyond the pasture, something unreadable tightening in his expression. He swallowed, and nodded to himself like he was making some quiet agreement with the past. A warm wind stirred the grass and the edges of Ellie's braid. She leaned on the pitchfork, catching her breath, sweat on her brow but pride in her chest. For the first time in days, the weight on her back felt just a little lighter. The barn echoed with sounds of life. Boots scuffling in straw, goats bleating, the soft snort of the mare, and children's laughter catching on the breeze like something too long kept quiet. The sky stretched out in a canvas of orange and gold, streaked with hints of lavender as the sun dipped low over the horizon. The ranch was quiet now, the day's work done. The chickens had settled in their coop, the goats were huddled in their pen, and even the wind seemed to be catching its breath, moving softer through the tall grass that bordered the house. Cole sat in his old rocking chair on the front porch, its creak in rhythm with his slow movement. The wood beneath him was smooth from years of use. A mug of coffee sat on the railing beside him, long since gone cold. He didn't seem to mind. He wasn't drinking it anyway, just holding it now and then, as if the warmth might come back if he waited long enough. Ellie and Luke sat on the steps below him, side by side. Ellie hugged her knees, her chin resting on them, her eyes watching the colors fade across the sky. Luke leaned back on his elbows, a few blades of grass sticking out of his hair. He'd spent the afternoon trying to catch frogs near the creek and had come back muddy, grinning, and full of stories. Ellie had listened, amused but quiet, her laughter coming easier these days, though never for long. Behind them, the screen door creaked as it gently rocked open and shut in the breeze, squeaking a little like it had something to say but wasn't sure how to start. They sat in a silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. It was the kind of quiet that happens when things aren't fixed, but they're no longer falling apart. Ellie looked up at Cole, her voice soft but clear. "You ever gonna get tired of us?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Cole stopped rocking. He looked down at her, eyes shaded by the brim of his old hat, his face drawn but gentle. "Nope," he said simply. Luke sat up straighter, looking at both of them. "So, this is home now?" His voice was hopeful, almost afraid to ask it. Cole turned his gaze out over the fields. The pasture glowed golden, the cattle just dark shapes in the distance. The barn cast a long shadow that stretched all the way to the edge of the porch. He let out a quiet breath through his nose, the kind that carries more than words. It was empty for too long, he said. Now it feels like something again. Ellie didn't say anything. She just nodded, her eyes flicking back to the sky as stars began to blink to life in the deepening blue. Luke leaned against her, and she wrapped an arm around his shoulders. He didn't resist. He let his head fall onto her side, eyes fluttering from the long day. Cole reached for his mug, held it in both hands. He rocked again, just a little, the wood beneath him groaning with memory. There wasn't a welcome sign on the porch. There didn't need to be. The doors were open now. The house wasn't just full, it was alive. And in the stillness of the evening, beneath the endless western sky, 3 people who had once been strangers watched the sun disappear behind the hills and didn't feel alone.